Call of Duty surprised everybody when they announced DMZ, an extraction shooter hybrid that would break away from the traditional Warzone element. DMZ was entirely different to anything done before, including Warzone. It was PvE focused, it had a high emphasis on artificial intelligence, and focused mostly on mission trees, unlocks, and trying to do tasks with your friends. But less than a year from its release on November 16th, 2022, it's looking very likely that DMZ is going to be deleted and won't be part of Modern Warfare 3 and parts of Warzone going forward. But is this actually happening? Because at the moment, nothing has been announced for DMZ for Modern Warfare 3. There's been no words or conversations about it at all. So is this an unfounded rumor and is this just speculation? Or is DMZ actually going to disappear after a year? I'm going to start by talking about where this rumor is coming from, and then we'll talk about the actual evidence as to why DMZ might be vanishing very soon. Now, the rumor primarily comes from a lot of leakers associated with Call of Duty, and many of them in the past have been almost entirely correct about what is happening with the franchise. The people who leaked that all of the classical maps from Modern Warfare 2 were going to be part of Modern Warfare 3 are some of the same people saying that DMZ has been given the axe and won't be continuing much longer. So there's already a fairly decent basis for this rumor. And there's a couple of other compounding factors as well. For example, the content release schedule for DMZ from Season 1 up to Season 5 for Warzone has dramatically reduced the amount of content for DMZ over the span of those months. DMZ used to get a fairly substantial update with each season, and now with each season, it seems to be getting less and less every single time. And in fact, Season 5 was the lightest amount of content DMZ has ever received for any of its content updates across the entire year. And the final reason people are talking about this rumor is because the word DMZ has not been mentioned once in any of the public releases. But that isn't necessarily a nail in the coffin because information for Warzone has been equally as light and Warzone has barely been mentioned at all so far in the run-up to the premium release for Modern Warfare 3. So why might DMZ be disappearing? Why would this mode, which seemingly seems to be quite successful, be vanishing after less than a year and not supported in Modern Warfare 3? Well, the primary piece of evidence so far has been the rumors from the leakers themselves. And honestly, given so much that they've gotten correct about Modern Warfare 3, it seems very likely that DMZ is going to be chopped very soon. But there is a lot more about DMZ which leads to a huge suggestion that this mode won't be supported for much longer. And primarily, it's down to the amount of development work it takes. DMZ, by quite a stretch, is probably the most work Call of Duty has to put into any mode in Warzone. Whether it's Resurgence, whether it's, regular Warzone, whether it's Battle Royale, even if it's a limited time mode. DMZ is the most amount of work. It requires the most amount of UI, the most amount of back-end information because it tracks everything you extract with and everything you bring in, so on and so forth. And it requires the most amount in terms of developing things for it. The mission trees, the backstories, the reasons those missions exist, the dialogue surrounding them, the stories for them, the items you collect. It requires the most amount of work in any of the modes in Call of Duty by a fair stretch. Producing new missions, new points of interest, or new plot lines and things to do in DMZ is probably double to triple the effort of the average update for a Warzone game. Now, if you take, for example, a limited time mode in Warzone, that is something that probably doesn't take a huge amount of time to do, and probably has a higher player impact in terms of players playing it than DMZ does, considering the amount of time it takes. So if you can spend, hypothetically, although these aren't the actual numbers, half an hour making a quick limited time mode for Call of Duty Warzone, and it's super successful and lots of people play it, but it takes you 3 hours to do something for DMZ, and the player count isn't super high, the options are fairly clear. Now, obviously, that isn't an accurate timeline. These things take ages to develop. That's just a hypothetical. But that, to me, is what is occurring here with DMZ. This is a mode that requires a lot of effort, and by the looks of things, might not actually be as popular as people think it is. Now, while there's no denying that DMZ definitely has a community and definitely has an audience and actually hosts some of the most successful content creators in terms of live viewership, it is also not necessarily the most popular mode. Here, for example, is the search results related to DMZ versus Warzone, and versus Modern Warfare 3, and the value you're seeing here is monthly. It is without a doubt the least searched for element of Call of Duty at this point in time, despite the fact that it does have a high amount of viewership. And that's just because very few people, by the looks of it, actually produce DMZ content. But the truth is, search results on social media, videos, and streamers are not a fair representation of how popular something is. They are just an indicator. But the thing that really gave it away for me was two things. One, the introduction of pay to win, and two, the scaling back of content. Now, introducing pay to win bundles that had DMZ perks, things like UAVs, self revives, and other things that ultimately were detrimental to the fairness of the game, has been a fairly obvious indicator, in my view, that they're not making enough money out of DMZ compared to the amount of time, money, and effort that goes into developing it. You don't release these things that definitely would come under social media fire unless there's been a message from higher up saying, hey, DMZ actually isn't making us a huge amount of cash, and most of these DMZ players aren't buying skins, so we need to try and get them doing that. Often with Call of Duty, and when you're trying to figure out what's happening with the game, what's happening with future updates, it is their overall behavior that gives you the most results in terms of how they're treating something or treating a product. And in the case of DMZ, they've increased the number of pay-to-win bundles whilst drastically reducing the amount of content per season, indicating that they are not only just winding down and scaling back from DMZ, but they also probably feel that it's not doing enough from them either player count-wise or financially. And like I said, Call of Duty Warzone by comparison is probably less time and effort and probably produces more player counts and more revenue, and thus it's just a simple business decision that DMZ wouldn't continue. I also think that this sort of hybrid DMZ zombie situation happening in the zombies mode for Modern Warfare 3 is another indicator that this might not be something that they are supporting long term. It just seems to me that if you're somebody at Sledgehammer, there's no way you're going to be supporting zombies, DMZ, Battle Royale, potentially raids if they decide to announce those two, as well as the campaign at the same time. It's far too much work, far too much effort, and ultimately if zombies is going to come into the fray as a mode, to me that seems fairly obvious that DMZ is going to be out of the fray as a mode. So it does look as though DMZ will not be continuing, and for me personally that isn't a huge issue, but obviously I know lots of you guys have been playing DMZ and it has been a way to escape the sweatiness of Warzone and enjoy a more casual laid-back experience, which is a good thing. In my view, I think the Warzone release happening around November-December with Modern Warfare 3 will release the new map with DMZ missions on that map. I think DMZ is going to be wind down after that, but I think they will have the first new map produce DMZ missions, and everything after that is probably not going to mention it at all. So whilst you'll still be able to play DMZ, and it will likely feature missions on the new map as well, I don't think it's going to be something that's going to be supported at all beyond probably seeing an update for the new integration, and that's about it. For me personally, I'm not too upset about this. I don't think DMZ was a good mode, in my opinion. I think it kind of missed the mark of being an extraction shooter. It missed the mark of having an intensity to it or a risk-reward system to it, and I just don't think it was very well thought out. I think many people were expecting DMZ to be like a more casual version of Tarkov that allowed them to have a risk-reward system, that allowed them to lose things and try to gain things. But instead, DMZ kind of, to me, just turned into a bot shooter with a few missions in it, and there's not really any risk at all with DMZ. You don't really lose anything whenever something goes wrong. Whilst it does build good story arcs when you're interacting with other players, and sometimes the PvP modes can be quite, intimidating and pretty decent to play, I think overall it just didn't tick the boxes that the majority of people who were interested in DMZ wanted to see. And honestly, even right now, it's kind of unplayable. I mean, there are a limited amount of missions that you can do, and most of those end up being completely ruined by pre-made six-man teams, some of which seem to be cheating quite regularly in DMZ. Overarchingly, I think it is just a simple business decision that DMZ requires a lot of work, a lot of practice to keep it working and not glitchy and buggy, and it just isn't worth the time or player count available. But I'm interested to see what you guys think about DMZ. Is it something that you actually played? Is it something that you ended up getting on with? Or was it something that you weren't interested in? And if it does leave from Modern Warfare 3, is it something that's going to be critical to whether or not you play the game? As always, folks, thank you for watching. Drop a subscribe and a like, and I'll catch you in the next one.